Hello and welcome to another episode of The Fulcrum. On today's episode, we have a unique opportunity to hear from some of our ADA delegates from the Virginia delegation to update us on what happened at the ADA House of Delegates. Our panelists include Doctors Elizabeth Reynolds, Brenda Young, Justin Norbo, Frank Yarno, Jonathan Wong, and Ralph Howell. Thank you so much for joining us. Virginia has 12 delegates and 12 alternates. They are voted on by the members here in Virginia, and they send those folks to the American Dental Association's House of Delegates to vote on policies, to set the tone for the association, the strategic planning, and also a big part of it is electing the leadership of the upcoming ADA. So we just had those elections. It was a very unique election, one that I think we can elaborate on. And Dr. Ralph Howell actually ran for Speaker of the ADA. Unfortunately, did not win. They just did not know what they were missing. But Ralph is our Speaker here at the Virginia Dental Association for our House of Delegates and has served as parliamentarian for a long time. So well-versed, has gone to the ADA meeting quite a bit. Dr. Howell, how unique is what happened in DC with a president-elect getting successfully nominated and elected off of the floor? How unique is that?
It's extremely unique, Ryan. In my 20 years serving on the delegation, this is the first time I've witnessed it. And in talking to some of the other delegates there that had been longer than I have, they don't know of in their lifetime whether it's happened yet or not. Generally, to run for president-elect, you're a member of the Board of Trustees or you're a former speaker, and then you run for the office. The treasurer and the speaker, those two candidates have to be vetted by the board, and they send in their resumes and their qualifications, and they're vetted. The second vice president and the president-elect typically have to announce the closing house the year before, and then they have a year to campaign and to get out their information. If they don't announce it that day, they cannot campaign until a month before the House of Delegates starts. But the unique piece this time is there were two people that ran off of the floor, and one of those candidates won. The two finalist candidates were actually from the floor. There was also a speaker from the floor for second vice president. That candidate did not win. In hindsight, maybe I should have run from the floor, Ryan, but because that seemed to be the way to go for this kind of election. But definitely a unique thing, not something that happens often. Both individuals that ran from the floor were very well known within the association. They had leadership positions, but they currently were not serving on the board. And I think because of all the times that were a little bit of a turmoil, which we're going to talk about later, that stimulated some other people to decide, let's get somebody from the outside of this gang.
It was an election driven by, we want something else.
And that, I think, was the really interesting and important part of it, is that and both of the people that ran from the floor were very well qualified. One came from AdPAC, the other had served on many councils and committees. So it wasn't that they were just delegates that had decided to run. They certainly have been very active in the ADA up until that point, but certainly have never served as a trustee, which Ralph is right. Most of our past presidents have been trustees. And Ralph, you brought up an interesting point, which I don't think I realized, that the Speaker of the House oftentimes will run for president. And I think we are going to be seeing that in the next House.
That's correct.
It was a very interesting election this year. And I think it makes people think about if they can do it, I can do it.
I also think it speaks volumes as to what the perspective of the ADA is among the general membership, right? I think that when you look at the folks that did win and the folks that ran traditionally, I do feel that sometimes people who aren't in the know, so to speak, feel a little bit ousted, right? They feel like it's not, that maybe the leadership is in an ivory tower or they're unapproachable. And I really think that Frank and I talked about this on the way up and on the way back. I think that it speaks volumes about the governance. It all leads back to governance and what people want. And I don't think the ADA general membership wants this path of 30 years to leadership anymore. So I really am looking forward to seeing how this changes and translates into our governance study that's coming up.
Yeah, that's great. And our president, or the second vice president, is young, which is super exciting. We've got a young dentist that's going to be serving in a great position with the ADA.
Yeah, I think that's a sign of what's to come. Kind of a very exciting time to be involved in the leadership and to carry that message down to the average member. I think there's just a lot of change coming, and it's all going to be good.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like it was a change agent House of Delegates. There was a lot of excitement around the candidates, and I think because they came from the floor, it was a little bit more exciting, and it didn't follow the script. And I think people were really interested in not following the script. And there were a lot of in-depth conversations about some policies and other items. One of the more contentious discussions, all within good banter, but the House of Delegates voted to do away with the Strategic Forecasting Committee, which had been established in the 2022 House of Delegates as a new standing committee of the House in an attempt to make the ADA more nimble back in 2022, with being more responsive, and in theory being quicker in timeline and flexible with a strategic plan while staying on track. That was the theme for why the strategic plan or the strategic forecasting was put into place. But that has now been disbanded. They have said, we don't want to go that direction. The House said no to that, but there's still some debate or some clarity needed to be given, I think, about what change does this mean for the ADA? Do we just go back to the way we were, or who's responsible for the strategic forecasting of the ADA? Dr. Norbo, you played a role in this back in 2022. What are your thoughts on this going forward?
Yeah, you're right, Ryan. In 2022, I was a part of the Strategic Forecasting Task Force, and what we were charged with was to review the existing structure of the ADA and how we were governing ourselves. So we kind of had a forward-thinking mindset, this task force did, to look at what Fortune 500 companies are doing and really adopt a different mindset. Traditionally, the ADA has been operating under a strategic plan, which is usually revised approximately every 5 years, set by the board. So a strategic plan sets a direction and you stick to that direction. Now, we all noticed what happened in 2020, which made us realize that we have to veer off of that straight line path from time to time. So in 2020, we looked at what we called strategic forecasting and established what was called the Strategic Forecasting Committee. I'll call it the SFC, which was adopted by the House of Delegates. It was a bylaws change which required a 2/3 vote by the House. And the thought was, again, as you said, it was to make the governance much more nimble. The Strategic Forecasting Committee, as you stated, was a standing committee of the House of Delegates. So the way the House of Delegates has traditionally worked is we get together once a year where resolutions are reviewed and voted up or down or whatnot, and we set policy. So if you think about once a year, that's the only opportunity that districts or states have the opportunity to submit resolutions. It does seem a little bit archaic. This SFC was off and running. I think that the House of Delegates really found it to be a very complex structure, and therefore I think there was a lot of frustration, and it almost seemed by many districts that the governance became more bogged down than the SFC was intentionally trying to resolve. So for that reason, the ADA, again, has been struggling with governance for some years, voted to essentially dissolve the Strategic Forecasting Committee. So that's where we are now. And now the ADA has also, every 12 years, is supposed to do what's called a governance study. So many of the resolutions that were related to governance throughout this past House of Delegates were actually referred to this upcoming year's governance study. And a lot of the mechanics of the SFC will probably be reviewed and looked at in that governance study. So while it was dissolved, I think there were some really good concepts that existed. It's just the ADA and the association doesn't necessarily operate like a Fortune 500 company. So we'll see what the governance study comes up with next year as it reports to the 2026 House of Delegates.
And Justin, it's really interesting that you said there's some good things that came out of SFC, because not to take it back to the elections, but our president-elect was one of the leaders of SFC. So it wasn't that everybody thought SFC was terrible. I think that people thought right now it's cumbersome. And I think, unfortunately, the political timing of it wasn't great either, with all of the stuff going on with finances and the membership software and everything. I think people just felt like it was time to get things back to a more simple governance structure with the House of Delegates and us reviewing things. And along with that, it really echoed that the priority right now, which Dr. Palmio ran on, was, hey, all of this stuff is good, but we need to get back to being financially stable. I think that with some of the costs that were going on with the SFC, the delegates looked at that and said, we could probably spend this money better someplace else and right the ship before we go off in too many different directions.
And I think it was structured in a way, it felt, because it was broken up into Northeast, South, and West, that we had less voice in it. It was all dependent on a certain number of people that were engaged in each of these 4 areas. And from Virginia, we had a couple of people that were involved in it. And as they hopped on to whatever their committee was, they felt that they were behind. They were already starting from a behind situation versus being engaged and proactive. Whereas a delegate, or where if you're on a regular committee or something, you have a little bit more knowledge about what's going on and involvement, engagement. So I think that there are a lot of good things that came out of it. And I think that we're going to be able to incorporate a lot of things, but just it seemed to be a lot more, you're right, it was bogging things down.
I'll be interested to see what the new governance study comes up with. SSC was the ADA's first foray into trying to make a change in governance, but really what they did was added to governance, and they didn't really change anything. But one of the major tenets of the SFC was to increase that communication between leadership and the average Joe. And so that's a good thing, obviously. I'm not a big fan of drawing lines and saying north, south, east, west, you have to be part of this group, that group, the next group, because honestly, new and younger members don't envision themselves as being part of a group, a line. They just want a voice in the association. Hopefully the governance study will bear this out. Many associations are going through these changes in governance, as they call it, flattening of governance. The hardest part there, I think, for the House is that for those of us that have been involved, this might mean there might not be a House or a House that's this big. And we have to have the foresight and the confidence that making sweeping changes like that is overall good for the association. It'll make our voice stronger, even if we're not having a meeting once a year with 250 people there clamoring about some resolution and bickering over the editing of the resolution. I don't think new and younger members want to be a part of that process. but they want to have a voice. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this pans out over the next few years. It's going to take some time, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And time is one thing and timing is another. And the timing of the SFC was, I think it's falling apart, was due to the timing. It was just, there were other things happening at the ADA, with association management software being the biggest one, but some other things that just didn't allow it to really take off. But it was, I think Frank is exactly right. And if you're willing to change, you got to also be willing to fail along the way. And you're not going to get it right the first time. You're just not. When you make big changes, things are going to go wrong, and you learn from them, and then you keep trying, though. So there was some good that came from it. It was quite the discussion topic, though, and so was the sedation guidelines. And that has been all over social media. I've seen a lot of discussion about that. Dr. Wong, I know you were heavily involved in this, and really from the Virginia delegation, everybody looked to you to speak with authority on this, which you did wonderfully. If you wouldn't mind letting us know what happened at the ADA related to that.
Absolutely, Ryan. For me, this was like the Royal Rumble. And I think that social media, I guess, emboldened this a little bit. But as Frank was saying, it's a touchy subject because this happens a lot with specialties. There's differing views. And the problem is that, as Frank mentioned, everybody wants to have their voice in this. And sometimes the ADA doesn't do a great job of that. So to give you all a little background, the ADA had an anesthesia summit that happened in, I think it was July, August-ish of this year, which involved all these specialties, involved what they call the stakeholders. AGD was there, ADSA, so the American Dental Society of Anesthesia, the American Society of Anesthesiologists were there. And they tried to work out what to change in these updates to the guidelines. And there's two guidelines. There's what we call the use guidelines and the teaching guidelines. And these are all updated roughly every 5 years. So we had them in 2007, then 2011 and 12, and then 2016. And then we had a big pause because no one could figure out how to fix these. It got kicked over to CSA, for Scientific Affairs, to look to see if there was an evidence base to really justify things. And from the summit, the political nature of it was that, hey, maybe we shouldn't be endorsing a certain specialty's guidelines because it might disenfranchise other specialties or even other dentists by directly signing off on these guidelines that we have no control over as the ADA. And that seemed like a novel change and a good thing to maybe change. And in conjunction with that was, hey, maybe we should take these guidelines that are often expert opinion, take them out of the House of Delegates, because now you have 300 people writing this. And as Frank mentioned, trying to edit these things on the floor when really the expert opinion is what those guidelines are about. Unfortunately, that turned into something totally different. So we had two sides. We had the oral surgeons saying that this was about getting rid of operator anesthesia. So, their basic model of doing deep sedation and general anesthesia while performing the procedures on pediatric patients. And their big concern was that with this was that we eliminated the age restriction that we used to say back in the day, that it was for children 7 and under, and then 13 and under, and then that verbiage disappeared. So they wanted something like that back. And of course, PD responded saying that they were trying to redefine the age of pediatrics, and that would infringe on their expertise and the wealth of knowledge that they had put into their guidelines. And what happens is everyone goes to their parties and stayed on their talking lines. And we actually saw a lot of that in the House of Delegates. And what was really fascinating to me was, for me, trying to put the two teams together and come up with a solution, which kind of didn't work amongst the specialties, but it worked amongst the delegates. We got a coalition to stand down and not try to edit these on the floor, which was great. And then the other thing that I saw that happened was that we were almost pushed to the cliff where we were going to get rid of, in my opinion, everything. There were these two substitute resolutions that said general dentists and specialists can use their own society's guidelines, which meant there would be no ADA guidelines. So we talked people off that precipice. And in the end, what everyone cares about is that we got past all the talking points. We got to the, forgive the language, the real stuff. I want to say the other word, but real stuff there. And we decided that the best way forward with all of this is to let what was Resolution 407, let the ADA develop something new, and we'll come back with those new recommendations for a pediatric guideline, and then sort out all of this and hopefully sort it out in a way that works for everybody. The one thing that I felt was a big, failure on our part, but change is hard, was it really does make sense for us to move this so that, this is something that CDEL handles, or maybe the House of Delegates can have a say in the best way to do this. And I know this gets into the technical parliamentary side, but we could either vote yes, no, or yes with referral, refer it back to them and tell them what they need to fix so that we're not rewriting these things. Because when this comes out, you guys are going to see, unless, in fact, the speaker even pointed out, there were some legal, like the legal team said, hey, your two documents don't match. And they're going to go back and fix that. But there's a lot of inconsistencies between the use and the teaching guidelines. Those need to be fixed up because we started editing things on the floor.
This whole thing, to me, as a former oral surgeon, is very concerning, just because if you can just agree upon patient safety is the absolute priority for any of these guidelines and any of these resolutions, then the guidelines and teaching guidelines become very clear. Just put the politics aside and focus on the patient and what's best for the patient and what's safest. And the guidelines will write themselves. The problem is we can't get over the politics of being part of a group. This is, again, goes back to me saying before, why are we putting ourselves in these boxes? We are all under the ADA umbrella. So patient safety is what you focus on. And that's what the guidelines and the teaching recommendations are made from. And put the politics aside. Just have to do that.
And Frank, you're so right, because that's something that came out with 407. And actually the part that I think, I came back to the American Society of Dentist Anesthesiologists with this report. And the thing we were happiest about was 407's second resolving clause, which said, hey, everyone doing sedation, anesthesia, and it doesn't have to be a sedation or anesthesia misadventure, even any sort of near miss or dental problem, we're going to report this back for QA, QI analysis so we can see where are the problems that we actually need to fix so that we can make anesthesia, sedation, and dentistry while under sedation or anesthesia safer for every dental patient. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a CRNA, whether you're a physician anesthesiologist, an oral surgeon, a general dentist, pediatric dentist, periodontist, you name it. And I think that's going to be our way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going along to the next topic, which was finances. Very much the main thing that everybody was talking about. And coming into it, obviously, had been a lot of town halls and lead up to the ADA House of Delegates with the president-elect, and other board members doing town halls, trying to make sure everybody's understanding of where the finances are. The ADA, it's no secret, has had some financial woes. A lot of that is due to the association management software. The switch over to Salesforce has not gone well. I think that's a pretty fair statement to just say it has not gone well. It has cost way more than it was supposed to. And now the ADA is saying, okay, we can't do anything about what's already been done, but we do have to buckle down to make sure that we're here for the future of dentistry. Because at the end of the day, I know no one likes paying their dues. No, that's no one's favorite part of organized dentistry. But without it, it really leaves us with no ability to accomplish the goals set forth by the ADA, by the VDA, and by your local components. A contentious, and maybe not contentious among the House of Delegates, but contentious probably in the coming months when people start to get their membership renewals, is that there was voted to raise the ADA dues by $57. 9 of that 57 was directly attributed to things that passed in the House of Delegates. So there was an attempt to say, if we're spending something for an action that we want us to do, then we need to find money to pay for it. And reserves have been used. People did not have a stomach for that. But where do we see ourselves in the ADA and its finances in the coming years?
So I think for me, a couple of things stand out to me. Number one, on the House floor, the dues increase of $57 had absolutely no problem passing. In fact, it was the $9 that was suggested to make up for the loss from the association management system over the last few years. Really, because the ADA they had lowered dues for 24 and 25 by 30 and did not do the average cost of living increases for those years. So really, it puts us back to where we were, maybe just a little higher than what we would have been if we had kept the dues, didn't lower them to $30, and kept up with inflation. So it really didn't have any problem passing in the House. The underlying problem here is the big losses that we've taken over the last year. And to me, that really falls squarely on the shoulders of the Board of Trustees. They're fiduciarily responsible for what happens at the ADA. And we were losing millions of dollars on a project that really didn't have proper oversight. And for what it's worth, they were maybe hoodwinked by the previous CEO or whatever. Many trustees have taken responsibility for this, which is great. But this feeds into, this is the reason most likely why somebody from the floor was elected president. There's some distrust there. And we're on the mend. We're moving forward from that. I would hope that some good board training goes on as people onboard onto the board so that they understand what their job is. Their job is oversight of the CEO, and they are the fiscally responsible for what's happening there. But there's also a lot of other things that they need to be doing. And so I think to regain the trust of the membership, the board has to show that they're doing that work. Dues going up $57. Some people notice it, some people won't. The sad part is that the non-members don't understand what they're getting from an advocacy standpoint, not only at the national, but also at the state and local level, even when they don't pay the dues. So that's a huge problem. Maybe the governance study will show there's a new way to pay ADA dues. Ryan, you and I have discussed this before. Maybe there's no dues to join the ADA. Maybe every practicing dentist can be a member of the ADA. They pay dues to their state and local, and the states pay a, let's say, registration or association management ADA.
Right.
Membership.
Like a franchise fee.
A franchise fee, something like this. Because it's meaningful. I'm currently the vice chair of CGA, which is the Council on Government Affairs for the ADA. So we go on Capitol Hill and lobby for things like ERISA reform and Medicare. Things that really affect us are going to affect us long term. If I approach a lobbyist and say that I represent 100% of the practicing dentists in the country, that holds a lot more value than if I go in there and say, well, we represent 49% of the practicing dentists in this country. So we have to be mindful of the fact that membership is very impactful for advocacy, and whatever we can do to decrease those barriers, especially on the national level, worthwhile. So the dues increase. Look, for those of us that have been members for all our lives, $57 is what, 2 trips to Starbucks, maybe 3. If you take your staff, it's not even 1. So it's
I think
doable.
you're hitting a really important topic. At the end of the day, the value of membership is one that can't always be monetized. And that has always been, I think, one of the bigger challenges when somebody says, what does membership do for me? It's hard for me to always be able to sit down and say, hey, dollar for dollar, look, you got every dollar back because you used one of our discounts or you took advantage of a VDA member perks program or whatever it may be. That's difficult. So it's always hard to put the value on protection. And really that a lot of the time is spent on just making sure that your life isn't worse. Better is expensive. But it's hard to spend a lot of your time very much just focused on trying to keep the wolf at bay. And there are so many of them. And that's what I know people get caught up in their day to day. And it's very hard to always keep everybody aware of that. It is something, the association management software, I think, again, I'll throw this out to the group, but I'm excited about where this could go because there are some really tough questions being asked that haven't been asked in a very long time. And there are valuable things being asked and challenging the way things have always been because necessity breeds ideas. And to be quite frank, necessity is here. What are we going to do different? And how's it going to look? And so we shouldn't be throwing away any ideas at this point because something is out there to make things better. Because y'all know, and we all know, membership's trending in the wrong direction, whether it's at the ADA or Virginia or Florida or Texas, California, it doesn't matter. There is a disconnect, and it's not from a lack of activity. If anything, I would say the ADA is extremely active. I know in Virginia, our legislative priorities and deliverables have been through the roof. What we've wanted and what we've gotten are pretty much the same. Not always, but and here we are with a big fight on our hands coming up in January as well as we try to address the workforce issue. And so those things, you're right, Frank. It's hard to always explain the benefit.
Yeah. So I'll shamelessly plug an article that's going to come out in the VDA Journal in the next issue. And I outlined, I think, 20 legislative wins that we've had in the state of Virginia that are meaningful. And I just put in there, it's a great little, like, very to the point article that you share with people that are not members that say VDA doesn't do anything. Well, here are 20 wins that we've had over the last maybe 5 or 6 years that are impactful, that impact everybody's day-to-day practice. And a lot of them are specific to third-party payers. And I also put a little blurb in there about how ERISA kind of affects how the wins that we have at the state level are of limited value because of ERISA. But there's hope, there's light at the end of that tunnel. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at that, not just read it, but share it with somebody who's not a member. To show them, these are the easiest things to show them. It's just a list and a table. I made it easy to digest as possible so that you can share this with people that aren't members.
We'll go deep dive into it in the next episode of the Fulcrum. All right. I love it. Speaking of that tunnel you just mentioned, to wrap things up, where do y'all see the ADA coming out on the other side of that tunnel? It's at a hard place right now, but I think the waters look clearer further off. But where do y'all see the ADA in the next few years?
I'll start by chiming in on that, Ryan. One of the things about being around as long as I have been on the delegation, I've seen some things. And about 20 years ago, the ADA was in dire financial straits. They had fired a CEO and they found out some wrongdoing with that CEO. And there was some mismanagement and there were a lot of things going on. Today, even though the ADA has some financial issues right now, it is stronger physically than it was at that point in time. So we have grown and gained over the years since that time. And I think the ADA can do it again. Chiming in on some of the things that Frank had said, there's a lot of wins legislatively, but one of the small wins that we have every day, if any of you do implants, doesn't it frustrate you how many wrenches you have to have, how many parts you have to have, and how many pieces you have to have? Now think about your handpiece. Those burrs fit in that same handpiece. Every burr fits in the same daggone handpiece. That's because of ADA standards. Implants were directed and created outside of the ADA. And so the ADA had no control over standards of those. And you see how awry just that is. So imagine how much more difficult your practice would be if every material you used was like an implant and had so many different pieces and parts that don't fit anything but their own. So that's one thing that the ADA silently does in the background, that if you don't have membership and you don't have people paying their dues, that doesn't get done. And your life is drastically harder. So I think the end of the tunnel is very bright.
That is great. I appreciate that. Sounds like another episode for the Fulcrum. We're going to go deep dive into some of those other things there. Dr. Howell, that's going to be awesome.
You know, Ryan, the other thing that I was really heartened by at this House of Delegates, I know some people were, when we saw all of the stacks of paper we got this year, resolution after resolution, and some of the resolutions were even designed to try and maybe prevent certain individuals from flooding the zone, so to speak, with resolutions. But what I was really heartened by with this is that we have, as we've been talking about, maybe three different types of individuals. You have the individual dentists that we call it in economics the freeloader problem, which is one of the hardest problems to solve because you get the benefits, but you don't necessarily have to be involved. Okay. But the two that I see really were heartened were your general member who's looking at these things and maybe the quote unquote echo chambers of social media and getting upset about these things, whether it's the sedation guidelines or the financial situation of AMS or the leaving of the executive director and everything. And you know what? It fired them up and it got them involved. So those people started getting into the fold and everything. And then the farthest side of things are what we talked about, all of us who are like, yeah, we're going to pay our dues and we're the diehards. We're going to be here to the bitter end. But you know what? It made us realize that there's a lot more people who want to be involved. And we actually have some really, as you said, good ideas, new, fresh ideas coming in. And you know what? When we face adversity, we have two choices. We can either let it destroy us or come out on the other side even stronger. And really what it seems to be doing is pushing us towards those new ideas so we can come out stronger.
Jonathan, I couldn't agree more. Like I know there were a zillion resolutions. I know that the speaker spent a ton of time putting them in order, and I really appreciated that. But I think the fact that those individuals brought forth those resolutions on behalf of the people that think like they do and stood up and debated them, and to your point, got everybody involved. I just think it's a wake-up call for the rest of us to listen to what these people have to say. We're excited to hear what they have to say, right? And we will come out better for the diversity that they brought to our organization, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we're building a future for our future dentists and making sure that everybody can practice the way that they have and be successful. I would getting 100% membership. I think we need to tie the ADA dues to your licensing. In Virginia, our license fees aren't that much. I don't, relatively speaking. Maybe that's how you get everybody involved or active and successful, is you make them all members because it's tied to their licensure. And there are a lot of great ideas out there. There's a lot of young blood this time. I thought it was a really exciting house, even though it was a lot of paper and a lot of resolutions, but a lot of things to think about and different opinions and ways that people are practicing it. I thought it was a great house. It was time consuming. It was long days, but it was really engaging.
I agree with you, Brenda. I haven't, in my, I think, 8 years in the House of Delegates, I don't think I've seen a house like this. And I think it really, I think just starting with the election of the president-elect, it was clear that the entire House felt that there was essentially a repudiation of the norm. To be the two finalists on the ballot were individuals from the floor of the House. The gentleman, Dr. Palmier, who won, was not necessarily in the upper on the board. It was a very different feel. I was refreshed to see a lot of new ideas. I think the House really understood how important it was to tighten the belt and be a lot as fiscally responsible as possible with the dues dollars that are coming in due to the AMS and poor AMS rollout. But I think with new leadership, with the interim executive director at the ADA, I think we're finding some calmer waters, and I will be excited to see what the governance study comes up with at next year's House in 2026.
Yeah, I'm with y'all. I'm excited about the opportunities that are in front of the ADA, and I don't want to look at them any longer as hurdles. They're opportunities. They're there for new ways of thinking, challenging old ways of thinking. Not that those are wrong, but just to say, what can we do? What we always have to be striving to change, to adapt, to keep up. And those things are not easy. But the question isn't really what does the ADA do for me? The real question is what happens if I don't join? And if you don't join, unfortunately, you're going to find out. And that's where nobody wants to be. With that, I want to thank our Virginia delegates who joined us to give us just a brief insight as to what happened at the ADA House of Delegates. There was so much more and so many details that we could go into, but we would need a lot more episodes of that. And maybe we will do a few more. There's plenty going on, lots of things to share. And I hope that everyone finds this a very useful mechanism for getting that out. I think it's more interesting to hear from everyone than it is to read an article. Trying to summarize all of this into one place would be very difficult. So tune in for our future episodes, one of them being Frank. We're going to have him talk about that article he just talked about. And then we got to get Dr. Howell on here as well, bring in Ralph Howell to talk about some of what the ADA really does and deep dive more than just the normal things that people think of. I think that would be really valuable for people to understand just the many layers that are the ADA and to some respect, also the layers at the VDA as well. But thank you all very much for your time. Thank you for volunteering and signing up to be a delegate and to play that role for your profession. Thank you, and thank you for joining us on another episode of The Fulcrum.